My name is Bayan Bartning, and I'm the president of Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. We are grateful to have all of you joining us today. This is our, I believe, 8th Welcome to FAIR session. We are going to walk through a 25-minute presentation, followed by plenty of time for Q&A. We'll start with having everyone on our side who's on this call introduce themselves. So I'll start with Paul.
Hi, everyone. My name's Paul. I'm a math teacher at a private high school in Manhattan. And I've been volunteering with FAIR since, very close to its start. And I'm doing outreach for setting up chapters in the Mid-Atlantic region right now. So I'm talking to lots of people, that have sent their information in. We have so many volunteers, and it's really exciting getting things going. And welcome.
I'll go ahead and go next. I'm Michael Trollin. I'm the Managing Director of Technology for FAIR. I previously worked in the advertising agency world and have run various nonprofits as well. It's been great to be a part of FAIR, working to build up our rapidly growing and expanding platforms. So good to meet you all.
Hi, everybody. I'm Letitia Kim. I live in San Francisco. I am the Managing Director of FAIR's Legal Network. And I'm thrilled to be a part of FAIR as we embark on this very important and timely mission.
Great, thank you. So a little bit of background about myself. I am, as I mentioned, my name is Bayan Bartning, and I have 2 children who, until this fall, were enrolled at a private school in New York City. And I observed what was happening. I think many parents in this country had similar experiences with their own children's schools, with just memo after memo referring to anti-racism and some shifts in the school's curriculum. I'm not opposed to the concept of anti-racism. Anti-racism just means opposing racism. But when I actually started to understand what the school was adopting, I started to have serious concerns. My background, my personal background in terms of ethnicity is I am half Mexican and Yaqui, which is a Native American tribe, and half Jewish. And what I felt is people like me don't even fit into this new framework because it seems to be espousing racial purity. And my wife is from the former Soviet Union. She immigrated to the North America when she was 5 years old. So I think we started to have serious concerns, started looking into where this was coming from. And I'm gonna, as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I am gonna walk you through a 25-minute presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So let me share my screen. Great. So our motto is one of our mottos is be pro-human. And I'll explain in a few minutes what we mean by pro-human. But we feel that this is representative of what FAIR stands for. I'm going to play a short video. This is just under 2 minutes long to start.
I'm Daryl Davis.
I'm Stephen Pinker.
I'm John McWhorter.
I'm Barry Weiss.
I am Glenn Lowry.
I'm Melissa Chen.
I am Ayan Hirsi Ali.
I'm Zed Jelani.
I'm Coleman Hughes.
My name is Eli Steele, and I support FAIR.
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 Today, almost 70 years after Brown versus Board of Education ushered in the civil rights movement, there is an urgent need to reaffirm and advance its core principles.
To insist on our common humanity.
to advocate for fairness and understanding,
to demand that we are each entitled to equality under the law,
to bring about a world in which we are all judged by the content of our character and not by the color of our skin.
That's where FAIR comes in.
FAIR is the foundation against intolerance and racism.
FAIR gets that our civil rights and liberties need to be protected.
It's not enough just to be anti-racist. We also need to be pro-human, moving forward together as one race, the human race. Join FAIR in support of compassionate, pro-human anti-racism, rooted in our dignity and our common humanity.
Join us.
So I'm just going to reiterate Daryl Davis's line in that short video. It's not enough just to be anti-racist. We also need to be pro-human. And I think that that's something that's important for us to emphasize. And what you'll notice there is that we are reclaiming some language. The word anti-racism has been used to represent an ideology that is actually racist. And we think that our side in this existential struggle needs to reclaim words like anti-racism. So our view is that it's not enough just to be opposed to racism. We also need to be pro-human. And again, I'll talk in a few minutes about what we mean by pro-human. So one thing that we think is critical and important for us to emphasize is that we don't view this as a partisan issue. We don't think this is a left versus right issue or Republican versus Democrat issue. This is really about whether we move forward as a society, as a country, as a people, or whether we move backward. And when we say backward, we mean not just to a past where people were judged by the color of their skin and not the content of their character, but a past where decisions were made based on subjective views, where conflict was resolved through public shaming and tyranny of the mob, and there was no rule of law, and where people were fearful and closed-minded to people, ideas, or even questions that challenge their beliefs. One of the things that we are focused on is reclaiming the language of morality and really pushing back on this consistent redefinition of important words in the English language. Some of the words that we are using include anti-racist, which still means opposed to racism. We're using a term neo-racism, and neo-racism was coined several decades ago. And this is a slightly updated definition, but it's fairly consistent with the definition that was coined several decades ago. Neo-racism is a belief that race is a real and inescapable social construct. And by social construct, that means that it is something that is not a biological reality, but it is based on cultural or societal views. It becomes something that is perceived as a reality, that determines an individual's identity, agency, beliefs, ability, or culture, such that members of different race groups can never understand each other due to intrinsic and insurmountable cultural differences. And many will look at that definition of neo-racism and see the similarities to the belief system that's being taught to our children, that's being taught in many of the implicit bias training workshops that people are going through in the workplace as well. Pro-human is another important word for us, and this means advocating for one human race, universal civil rights and liberties, and compassionate anti-racism rooted in dignity and our common humanity. I'm going to play another short video.
When me and Brad first met, I didn't think we'd get along, but turns out we kind of agree on everything. Your racial identity is the most important thing. Everything should be looked at through the lens of race.
Jinx, you owe me a Coke. We both have a lot of opinions about people of color, even though we barely know any.
I say colored people, but as long as we're classifying them, we both think minorities are a united group who think the same and act the same.
And vote the same. You don't want to lose your black card. Sorry, I don't know. I just think we should
roll back discrimination laws so we can hire based on race again. Jinx, now you owe me a Coke. Hey, tell them what you told me yesterday.
White actors should only do voices for white cartoon characters.
I've been saying that for years. Stick to your own.
Us white people, we have so much privilege.
I agree. It is a privilege to be white. Ask him about interracial dating.
All I said is that black men who date white women have internalized racism, and white men that date ethnic women are fetishizing them.
Guys against interracial dating now. Like, am I being pranked? Did Boomer put you up to this?
Ugh, you know that taco place is white owned?
White people should be making white foods like Kraft macaroni and cheese, no seasoning, not even salt. It's like he's a mind reader. I mean, I've been pushing for segregation forever, and my man does what?
I created an improv comedy show exclusively for ethnic people.
Guy segregates comedy on my birthday.
White people need to stop wearing dreadlocks, and they need to stop appropriating black people's music.
Shaved heads and country music, the way God intended.
You know all white people are racist.
I'm listening.
Even if you have a black wife or a black friend group, you're still really racist.
You know, we just kicked a guy out of the organization for having a black girlfriend, but if you can promise me he's still really racist, we'll consider letting him back in. Black people should only shop at black businesses.
I guess the only thing we really disagree about is I think white people are the root of all evil.
But what did I tell you, though? If we can narrow that down to a certain group of tiny-hatted white people, I think we can come to an understanding.
Technically, I don't consider Jewish people white.
Neither do I.
So that's from Ryan Long, who is hilarious. That's probably the 50th time I've seen that video, and it's funny still. But I think that's just a humorous illustration of the parallels between neo-racism and racism. And it's not a surprise that they're pretty much the same, because neo-racism is just a form of racism. This slide is for me the culmination of 3 months of really trying to understand where this belief system came from. In the words of Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said, "I don't give a fig about the simplicity on this side of complexity. I'd give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. This is my simplicity on the other side of complexity." There are a few things going on here. I would say the most important to understand is that at its heart, the New Orthodoxy is a postmodernist philosophy. Postmodernism is a belief system, a philosophy that was developed in the 70s by mostly French philosophers. And I would say, for me, Michel Foucault is really the most important name to understand. Michel Foucault was a bit of a celebrity philosopher who came to the United States and had a huge impact on American academia. In 1981, Time magazine wrote a profile of Michel Foucault where they referred to the cult of Michel Foucault. He was the Prince of Power. And I'll talk in a minute about the philosophy itself, but just suffice it to say that ultimately the New Orthodoxy reflects a lot of these postmodernist philosophical worldview. The other components of the New Orthodoxy come from Stokely Carmichael's Black Power, Pan-Africanism, and this concept called intersectionality, which we'll talk about in a minute. But intersectionality, identity politics, all these different ideas blend together into something that is referred to as critical theory. In the case of racial issues, it's critical race theory, but critical theory is applied to other areas of study, post-colonial studies, gender studies, et cetera. And ultimately that critical theory by itself is not really dangerous. That is just, it's just a theory. Where it's become dangerous and where it's turned into the New Orthodoxy is that theory really for decades now has been taught as reality on America's college campuses, and now it is extended far beyond college campuses, where it's, as I experienced with my own kids' school, it's coming into K through 12 schools, it's coming into the workplace through different workshops. And it's being taught through a methodology which is similar to what's used to spread belief systems like Scientology. It's using a thought reform approach where there is an incremental approach of spoon feeding step by step the ideology, so that when somebody starts on the path to embracing this orthodoxy, they are not actually told where the ultimate destination is going to be. So just like in Scientology, where you would go in and get a free personality test, or be told that you're going to learn how to be a better person, this new orthodoxy presents itself as teaching racial literacy, or helping to address issues of social injustice. In terms of the orthodoxy itself, the underlying philosophy is rather simple. And I think for many people, it doesn't sound like something that if it were presented this way, they would embrace. But this is ultimately where a true believer would end up. Couple pillars to the new philosophy. One is that power is truth. And what this is saying is that if you are a believer in the new orthodoxy, then you believe that there is no such thing as objective truth, that every fact is subjective. So it undermines things like the scientific method, the rule of law, right? Because if there's no objectivity, then there can be no objective decision making. And in fact, some of the more zealous adherents to new orthodoxy would say it's actually wrong to even try to strive to be objective. The second pillar is this concept of moral relativity. So other than the new golden rules, the new orthodoxy would say that every culture, every racial group, every country has its own subjective moral code, and that there is no such thing as right and wrong. It's really up to each culture. So when you see things like justification for female genital mutilation in certain parts of the world, that is based on this concept of moral relativity. And there are many ways you could argue against that concept. You know, one obvious one being that the young girls subjected to that horrific action never had any choice in whether or not that was going to be the culture that they were born into. But that is part of the new orthodoxy, is this belief that all morality is relative. The third is this concept of a perpetual zero-sum power struggle. And to me, this is one of the more, I mean, all of it is problematic from my standpoint, but this is one of the more dangerous aspects of the new orthodoxy, because if you frame the world as a place where you have different socially constructed groups and people are divided into these groups, so whether it's men versus women, or transgendered versus cisgendered, or Black versus Hispanic versus Asian, and everyone against whiteness, then you are going to create conflict. Because if you see the world as a place where there's a zero-sum power struggle, and a gain for one group is a loss for another group, then that's going to create conflict. And we see that between nations, and we definitely see it between individuals and between groups of individuals as well. The fourth pillar of the philosophy of the new orthodoxy is this concept of racial realism. So what you'll find is the first step of any curriculum or of any workshop is going to be to do two things. One is to convey the fact that race is a social construct, right? So there's an acknowledgement that science has proven that there is one human race. But then the remaining years of curriculum or hours in the workshop are going to be spent explaining that race may be a social construct, but race is still real, it's inescapable, and it not only is important, but it is the most important aspect of any person's identity. And the last pillar of the underlying philosophy is this concept of an intersectional hierarchy of oppressions. And this is really more of a Marxist framework, which is saying that that everyone is either a victim or an oppressor based on the socially constructed groups that they were born into, and you may in fact be both. You may be a victim and an oppressor at the same time. The new moral code is even simpler than the philosophy, and the moral code really, if I had to distill it down to to its essence, is if you are a member of the oppressor group, so if you are white, or if you are male, if you are cisgender, then you are tasked with dismantling, deconstructing all of the systems, all of the institutions of the oppressor group, and that includes the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, our schools, it's really everything. So it's a very destructive moral code, which helps to explain, I think, a lot of what's happening right now in our society. And if you are a victim in a victim group, then the moral code would say that you also are tasked with dismantling the systems of oppression and all of the institutions of the oppressors. And if you don't do that, then you are a race traitor. So you're held to the same standard. So it's really a moral code that has circular logic, and the only possible positive thing you can do is to protest and be an activist and work toward dismantling everything. So what happens to people when they embrace the new moral code and the new orthodoxy? I think it's good for all of us to understand how perception shapes reality, right? That if we see things through one lens, it can lead to us perceiving the world in one way and feeling a different way about different life events. I think this quote from Michel Foucault really sums up his worldview, and I think sums up in many ways the worldview of the new orthodoxy. And what he had to say is that my point is not that everything is bad, but that everything is dangerous, which is not exactly the same as bad. And again, if you see the world as this zero-sum power struggle between different socially constructed groups, then that's dangerous, right? If everything is dangerous, then we always have something to do. So my position leads not to apathy, but to a hyper and pessimistic activism. And when I first read this quote, that concept of hyper and pessimistic activism is really what struck me. And I think that if you look at what's happening in the world today, at what is happening to people who have embraced this worldview, they are turning into hyper and pessimistic activists. So in this illustration, you can see there's somebody who's embraced the worldview of the new orthodoxy, and they could go through the same lived experience. They could have the same life events, and they would come out of that feeling grievance and pessimism and despair, versus somebody who has a healthier worldview, who can perceive things in a different way and come out of that with gratitude and optimism and hope. And why is that important? Why do we care whether people have grievance and pessimism and despair versus gratitude and optimism and hope? Well, it really comes down to the psychology of thriving. And especially those of us who have children, I think, but really anyone should care about this, because the psychology of thriving applies to any human being. And this is based on plenty of empirical research that shows that gratitude and optimism don't only have an impact on our mental health, they actually have an impact on our physical health as well. And gratitude is the quality of being thankful, readiness to show appreciation for and to return kindness. And optimism is hopefulness and confidence about the future or the successful outcome of something. And another way of thinking about the opposite of optimism, which is pessimism, is this concept of learned helplessness. And I'm going to play a short video about this concept of optimism versus pessimism or learned helplessness, based on research by somebody named Martin Seligman.
Imagine you take two dogs and put them in two different areas. You shock the first dog and you give him an option to escape. He tries to escape, he's successful, and he gets away from the shocks. The second dog, however, you put in a place where no matter what he does, he cannot escape the shocks. He soon figures out that there's nothing he can do, he gives up, and he'll just sit there and accept the shocks. Now you take these two dogs and put them in two new areas again, but this time they can both escape. The first dog, who had learned that he was able to escape, will get out of there like usual. But the second dog will just lay there and accept the shocks, even though in this new environment, he could just escape. This is what is known as learned helplessness, and you probably know people who act like the helpless dog. The opposite of this is learned optimism. Learned optimism is basically the idea that you can learn to be optimistic and positive and happy. You can cultivate these things. And this is exactly what Seligman was trying to do by running a workshop. The results of the workshop were promising. 32% of the students in the control group had a moderate to severe episode of depression, in contrast to 22% of the group that was in the workshop. Also, 15% of the controls had an episode of generalized anxiety disorder versus only 7% of people who took the workshop.
So this is a clip from a video that anyone can find online if you're interested in seeing the full video. But this is illustrating that concept that there is actually a scientific basis for saying that optimism is healthier than pessimism. I think one way of thinking about how the new orthodoxy, the way it frames things, can actually affect outcomes would be if you are teaching people, if you're teaching children or adults to look for racism everywhere, right? Because the new orthodoxy will say that racism is everywhere, systemic racism is everywhere, and if you can't see it, you're just not looking hard enough. If you are looking for racism, if you're framing everything that way, if that is your worldview, then you will find it. You will have that pessimistic, negative outlook, and you will see things that may or may not be there. Whereas if you choose to see the world in a more positive way, then again you will come out with a more positive world perception. So this slide is illustrating what's been happening for decades now in our colleges and universities, which is that we have been reprogramming people to be hyper and pessimistic activists, right? If you think about a person as a computer, or some sort of I think maybe Michael will appreciate this as a technology person. So if you think about a person as a computer, then we've been sending students to colleges expecting that they're going to have new apps installed, they're going to get upgrades, but instead they're getting reformatted with a new operating system, right? And so it's not a surprise that after 4 years of going through this thought reform process in college, high school graduates who are coming out of homes where they're taught positive character strengths and values, they're taught gratitude and optimism and a healthier worldview, are coming out seeing the world through this more cynical, negative, pessimistic lens. And the moment that for me, I started to see this as an existential threat, not just to my kids, not just to the United States of America, but really to mankind, is when I thought about what are the implications of us taking this same thought reform process that is happening in our colleges and universities and bringing it into our grade schools, right? This is now happening with children who are 4 or 5 years old, and they don't have a chance, right? If you're taught to see the world through this lens, they won't have any other perspective but the one that they're being taught. So obviously, as parents of children or as people in the workforce who are being exposed to this, we think that we can probably protect our children or protect ourselves. I will say I know plenty of of parents who have seen this worldview infect their children and turn their children against them, against their own families. So what I would say is, I don't know for sure that we can protect our children fully from being assimilated into this worldview. But even if you can protect your own family or protect yourself, the question is, what does this worldview mean for society? And the way I would look at this is not an anti-racist worldview. This is an anti-virtue worldview. This is a worldview that's teaching more and more people to see the world through this cynical lens, which is going against every positive character strength that we know is required to have a healthy, functioning society. These are a few character strengths and virtues that are from an organization called VIA Institute on Character, which has looked across cultures and societies around the world on all the continents. So this is not just a Western perspective. And they have distilled down 24 different character strengths that they contend are required for a healthy, functioning society. Things like fairness and leadership and forgiveness and hope and humor. And across the board, when you look at what these character strengths actually mean, you can see that the new orthodoxy is flipping them on their head. So it's taking fairness, which is this concept of applying the same rules to everyone, and the new orthodoxy is saying, actually, we're going to have two sets of rules or multiple sets of rules, and we're going to intentionally discriminate based on immutable characteristics, right? You look at leadership, which is in any healthy functioning society is focused on ensuring good relations among group members. But in the new orthodoxy, leaders are actually told that they should be dividing people along racial lines and in other ways and pitting them against each other, right? If you look at character strengths like forgiveness, right? The new orthodoxy does not believe in forgiveness. It does not believe in forgive and forget. It believes in the opposite. And if you look at humor, the new orthodoxy is the death of humor, which I think is why many comedians, I think, are becoming aware of the threat. So what is FAIR going to do about this? We believe that this requires a multi-pronged effort, and it needs to address not just legal issues, but also cultural issues with the new orthodoxy. And our efforts are focused on three main areas. The first is to educate people, both about the new orthodoxy and about the pro-human movement. And that includes general awareness building. Think Schoolhouse Rock style videos. In my case, it took months for me to really understand what was happening. We want it to be something where you could have a 3-minute video that you could share with a friend, and they would really start to get and understand where this is coming from, why they should care about it. And obviously they may need to watch a few more videos to really fully understand it. But the idea is to make it really simple, easy, maybe even entertaining for people to learn about this. We're also focused on developing anti-racist, ethnic studies, whatever you want to call it, but curriculum and training that would be the antidote to this racist and intolerant orthodoxy. And that something that a corporate leader could bring in from a training standpoint that would address any needs from a diversity, equity, inclusion program standpoint, from an anti-racist standpoint, but that would actually be based on a pro-human approach and help build a culture of fairness, understanding, and humanity. We're also focused on empowering people. So this is really at its core, our focus for the last month and our focus for the next several months is on building out a national network of FAIR chapters. We want to really, I think ultimately create a movement just like Martin Luther King's nonviolent civil rights movement, maybe updated for the social media age. But we think it's important to have people engaged, involved, and connected with each other. We also think it's not enough just to organize people. We need to empower people by training them on how to be effective advocates. I don't love the term activist, so you'll notice I use the term advocates. Not a lot of people know that Rosa Parks had 10 weeks of training before she refused to sit in the back of the bus. I think that it's a similar situation here where we have a lot of parents, we have a lot of people in the workforce who are encountering this new orthodoxy, and we need to equip them with the tools so that they can be effective advocates. They know how to communicate, they know how to message, and they know how to actually affect positive change. The last area of focus for FAIR is advocating for civil rights and liberties. And maybe Letitia can talk during the Q&A a little bit about the FAIR Legal Network, but our intention is to identify cases and support legal action in a targeted way to uphold civil rights and civil liberties, and to stand up for people who are being bullied. So just to recap, we are modeling our approach on Martin Luther King's nonviolent civil rights movement. We are bringing a positive, pro-human message. We believe in being constructive and to really counter the deconstructing, the dismantling of the orthodoxy. We believe in moving our society forward, not backward. And we think it's extremely important that as a movement, we are reclaiming the language of morality and the moral high ground. And I think it's really important that people who are part of this movement have the same confidence, the moral certainty that the adherents to the dogmatic backward belief system have. If we're tepid in our viewpoints, if we're waffling, then we will not be effective advocates. So we think it's important that all of us really take stock of our beliefs, of our values, and that we have confidence when we're going and we're pushing for a pro-human approach. The last area of focus for us, again, is helping people be effective advocates for themselves and for their children. I think probably everyone on this webinar has seen our board of advisors. This is actually, we've had a few more people added since this slide was created, but we have an amazing group of people. I mean, many of these people are personal heroes to me. I think some of them were new to me as I was starting to build out FAIRS as an organization and starting to talk to people to potentially join the board of advisors. And just some of them I think are just indisputably heroes. I mean, Daryl Davis is a man who single-handedly convinced over 200 members of the Ku Klux Klan to leave the organization using a pro-human approach, right? And that made him, because he's someone who believes in common humanity, even if somebody who, in the case of someone in the KKK, felt that he was not a valid human being, he was able to connect with people on a human level and convince them that they were going down the wrong path. And because of that, he's become persona non grata for some people who are, I would call them extreme members of the New Orthodoxy. But we've got a ton of amazing people on the board of advisors. I'm going to end there. Welcome to the pro-human movement. We're really excited to have you all here, and let's open it up for Q&A. There's a Q&A that you can type questions into. It looks like some people are doing that already. And obviously there's a chat as well.
Great, thank you, Bayan. Yeah, we've been getting a lot of activity in the chat and the Q&A, which is great to see. Really nice to see that. I think I'd like to I'd like to start with one from Joanne here. Joanne asks, can I tell my school district administration and Board of Education that FAIR will be able to act as a curriculum content resource, or is it premature to offer that?
I think you could definitely tell them that FAIR will be doing that. Our goal is to actually have curriculum available in August. It's an aggressive goal. We have a team that's working on it. It's an achievable goal, but obviously, we feel an incredible sense of urgency, and we want to have something available before the start of the school year in September.
Great. Before I get to the next questions, I think you mentioned that we might want to give a quick answer to the general question of what is the legal network?
Sure.
Yeah. So the legal network is as follows. We are not going to be litigating any of these cases within FAIR. A lot of nonprofits have that model, but our model is a little bit different. What we will do is if we identify cases that we think are consistent with FAIR's mission and that in fact, have potential, what we will do is refer them out to our network of independent attorneys. And those attorneys will be bringing the litigation. So I've been working on assembling that network along with a few other people who are assisting me in that regard. And we've got attorneys all over the country and admitted in pretty much every jurisdiction.
Great. Next questions that looked interesting. We got a couple along these lines. Jermaine and Lindsay and a few others asked, what are some specific things a simple person can do in their small world without jeopardizing a family member's job? Or, if your school is promoting podcasts that say, here's what's wrong with public schools, it's white parents talking about decolonizing schools, etc. What can they say without just being called racist or being sort of stuck in that way?
So I would say a couple of things you could do. One is I would encourage you to join a FAIR chapter as they're established. And I think just finding a community of people who can give you support will help. And then obviously there's training and other things that we'll be providing through the chapter network. I also think just documenting what's happening is important. There's a private school in New York City, and a parent just mentioned to me in passing that on Fridays the school gave the kids ice cream, but they had the Black kids get ice cream first, and then all the other kids. And it was interesting because it had been happening for so long that it didn't even register to him that that's a little bit odd. And what does that do to the children? When they're actually so hyper aware of skin color that they're defining when a 5-year-old or 6-year-old gets ice cream based on skin color. So I think that no matter how mundane it may seem, I would say document it, and then feel free to share information with us, and we can protect your anonymity if that's what you'd like. But I think definitely document those issues as well.
Great. Looks like a follow-up question for Letitia from Bill is asking, how do lawyers get involved?
Thank you, Bill. If you'd like to get involved, please email me directly at letitia@fairforall.org, and we can set up a call and figure out how to take it forward.
Great. There are two questions that I can answer here. One is, how do software developers get involved to volunteer? And that's from Austin. And Austin, actually, I've started to reach out to folks. So if you've already filled out the volunteer form and you mention a software engineer, you'll potentially be hearing from me pretty soon. We've had, oh gosh, 1,000 people have reached out wanting to volunteer, which is great. So it may take a little bit of time, but definitely look for that. And then the second one related to that, Rhonda asked if we considered keeping a Zoom room open for members to chat anytime. And what I would say to that is, what we do have is we've created an online forum. If you sign up as a member and go into the members section, you'll find a forum there that you can post and have a discussion with other members of FAIR. Here's a question from Kyle. Kyle says, what I'd like most is how to talk in a way to expose these philosophies for what they are with friends who view anti-racism as it's taught today as a good thing.
So how to, sorry, Michael.
How to, sure, like sort of how to expose these friends to friends who view, you know, that other brand of anti-racism as a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the content that we're going to be developing. So, and the training. So I think that there are going to be techniques that we will try to help teach people how to approach issues like that. I think also having content where you could have a, 30-second video or a 2 or 3 minute video that you could share with a friend that is, that would at least get them to stop and think. I think that should help. I think there are different degrees of infection with this, this belief system. So I think if somebody is a true believer, it's going to be very hard to reach them. But I think there are many people who are confused, and that's based on the intentional misuse of language, where they are in favor of anti-racism. They're in favor of things like Black Lives Matter, just because obviously Black Lives Matter, obviously everyone's opposed to racism. So I think that those are people who are very reachable, and I think that our focus at FAIR is to have a message that will be accessible to people who believe in social justice, believe in changing the world for the better, and just helping those people along the way to understand that actually this postmodernist worldview masquerading as anti-racism is really, really bad and wrong, and is not really anti-racism, it's just racism.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'd like to add or expand upon what Brian said about how this is really, really wrong. I think a lot of people aren't really paying attention to what the fallout and consequences could be, the second and third stage consequences. And so just an example from my own personal life, my husband is Asian, he's Korean, and my children are half Italian and half Korean. And my son, who's 10 years old, came home from school a few months ago and said, I wish I was all white. I don't want to be Asian anymore because I feel like I'm being racially counted. And that's one of those things where, it sounds like it didn't happen, but it really did happen. And I approached the school and I spoke with them about it, that these are in fact the consequences of racially grouping people. So I think if somebody is open to that type of an argument, it's something that you could pursue.
Great. So it looks like there's a handful of questions here about chapters. What do we have here? What are the plans to create them? One person has actually emailed and filled out the forms, and it says Kathy just says she's maybe overly anxious, but wants to know when she could expect to hear back.
Great. So I think we have a team that is right now reaching out to people who have volunteered to be chapter leaders. We're viewing that as the first step is to identify chapter leaders, and then have the chapter leaders start to organize their chapters. So there's a process that we're going through. We have a handful of chapters that are already starting to get off the ground, and then the others over the coming weeks. Our goal is to have the chapter leaders identified, and then very quickly reach out to all of the other people who have expressed interest in being part of a chapter. If you are extremely anxious and ready to put enough time in, you can also feel free to email us. Just I think that will help us to understand who really wants to put the time in, and because it's not there's a lot of work required. I mean, for me, this is 100 hours a week right now. I'm sure for Letitia as well. Michael, I think, is spending a lot of time on this. Paul is right now a full-time teacher, but he's probably putting 100 hours in on FAIR on the side. So I think, we're not expecting people to put 100 hours in, but I think if somebody's really enthusiastic and thinks they could put in, 15, 20 hours, maybe 10, I don't know what's the minimum to really be an effective chapter leader, and wants to just hit the ground running, definitely I would say email as well, and just express to us that interest. One thing I will add is we are going to be hiring people as well. We've raised funds. I am not taking any salary. I will not be taking any salary. I am committed to this full time without being compensated. I know Letitia's in the same position. We have a number of people who are volunteering their time. Obviously, not everyone can afford to do that. So we are creating some paid roles, including a junior technology person who would be supporting Michael and our technology efforts. We are going to be hiring a paralegal to support Letitia. So if anyone is interested in those roles or knows someone who would be interested, definitely feel free to reach out on that as well.
One thing I might add there is that there are chapter forums already set up. So if you go to the website and click on chapters, you can hop into the forums and start to engage with some of the other folks from your area prior to the chapter getting up and running. Another question here, coming back to sort of current events and how to react on a personal level. Joe is asking, speaking of these current events that often spark angry protests, what can we do as FAIR to calm the waters? As speaking for himself, what can he do to calm the waters? How to get people to, accept verdicts, especially if they go against expectations?
No, I don't know that as an organization that at this stage, whatever the verdict is in the, and obviously there's the Minneapolis event that just happened, was it yesterday? I think that our focus right now is to get the organization off the ground and to be in a position to calm the waters or, take action on those cases. I think as an organization, at least my initial thought is we'd probably just not get involved in that at this stage. Our focus needs to be on getting the chapters off the ground, having everything up and running. I would expect and hope that in a few months we'll be in a position where we can, have a big impact on issues like that. One thing I saw there was a question from Lindsay about presenting this issue to their school board. There are alarming things they're seeing, podcasts about what's wrong with public schools as white parents, decolonizing schools. Decolonizing is definitely a term to be aware of and concerned about, and concerned that if they post on social media, they'll be called a racist. And what I would say is I think that's a great example where there's strength in numbers, and also in being part of the FAIR network, because there are ways of framing this and presenting this where it would be really hard for somebody to call you a racist. They may still try, but I think it would ring false. And if you're part of a group, that helps as well. So I think that what I would say is don't lose hope. Recognize that you will ultimately, the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, and justice is 100% on our side. I think that that's something that we all need to understand. And I think that when you have that confidence in the fact that you are advocating, not just, you may be white, right? This may be something where it's quote unquote, you could view it as self-interest. Look, I'm half Mexican and Yaqui. We have plenty of people who are of all sorts of racial backgrounds involved with FAIR who understand that this race reductionist approach is really the same as racism. Martin Luther King spoke very eloquently and powerfully on this issue, where he said, Black supremacy is just as wrong as white supremacy. And what what we need is a brotherhood of mankind. And so I think that in the end, any sort of system like this is damaging to everyone who participates in it, of all skin colors. So I would say, don't despair, don't lose hope. Ultimately, this, what we are advocating for is right and just and will prevail.
Great. It looks like we actually have a couple of questions here related to other organizations that want to know, are we planning to collaborate with Helen Pluckrose's Counterweight organization? There's a number of other groups that have popped up to fight CRT. Are we willing to work alongside the other groups to accomplish the shared goals?
Yes, no, we're already working closely with many organizations. This is a movement that's going to take a lot of different people, and I think the way that I've looked at it and described it is this is a David versus Goliath situation. Now, remember, David won. So I think that we need to look at it that way. I mean, realistically, we're up against billions of dollars in spend and a lot of entrenched interests, but ultimately it's David and Goliath. But I would say 80% of people really fall in that center right to center left spectrum that would support the viewpoint that we're advocating for. But David has been fragmented, right? So it's a David and Goliath situation, but we've had a lot of silos of activity. And part of what we see as our mandate at FAIR is to try and create some cohesion to our movement, which means bringing in, embracing other organizations that are on the left or on the right, but have aligned interest and a shared set of values.
I see a question here from Kavita that I can answer. It's a simple one. Is there a recording of this session available after? So yes, the answer to that is generally within a day or two. We put up a recording of this. You can see past sessions there currently already. It's on the member section of the website. If you sign up there as a member and log in, you'll be able to see, just click on content and you'll be able to see all the past recordings. Another question here that is interesting. What is the plan to reach the C-suites and educate corporate America regarding FAIR's goals?
So we launched a month ago. So we're moving very quickly, but obviously we have to sequence what we're doing. But the issue of corporate America is a big concern for us, and our view is that what's needed is a set of training materials, I think consulting services for corporations. We have been approached by some very large corporations that are very interested in working with FAIR, and we are initiating the process of developing training. And I would say our approach to all of these things is going to be taking a startup mindset. My background is for-profit startup businesses. I do not have a nonprofit background. And I think that's a positive right now in what we're dealing with. We have plenty of people with nonprofit experience who are there to help navigate issues, but I don't have a lot of patience, and I don't feel like we have a lot of time to solve these problems. So our approach is to develop what would be called a minimum viable product, get something out there as quickly as possible. So so our goal for curriculum is to have something before September. Our goal for corporate training would be to at least start engaging with corporations over the next few months, and to really develop a set of robust training materials so that if a corporation is sincere in wanting to address issues of bias or open-mindedness, right? So just, there are often employees who are dogmatic, right? And so any corporation that wants to develop a more tolerant, inclusive, truly inclusive community or sensibility into their corporate culture, we want to be there to support them.
Great. And I see we're getting close to time here, but a couple of questions that have been related to basically how big is FAIR already becoming?
So we're, I think we're around 16,000. Is that right? People
Yeah.
who have joined FAIR in the last month, and then of that, there are about 2,000 who have signed up to be volunteers or to start a chapter. So people who are willing to commit a substantial amount of, or some amount of time to helping with the launch of FAIR. So we're very excited about that. I just saw come in a question about, are there going to be T-shirts? And I will say we do intend to develop merchandise, and that is something, you know, personally I'm very excited about. But yes, we will be developing FAIR merchandise as well.
Great. So I do see it's about the hour mark. I imagine we want to wrap up here. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to all of the questions, but there are a bunch there. So thank you everyone for participating. It's been a pleasure to have so many people here. As I mentioned, we'll be publishing this video in a day or two on the content section of the website. So
Can you, Michael, can you just send the link in the chat to that?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then if anyone wants to communicate with us, I would say the best way is membership@fairforall.org. So membership@fairforall.org. And we try to get back to people as quickly as we can. And we're really excited to have you as part of the pro-human movement. And we look forward to getting to know you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.